Hi, students. I'm going to be talking to you today about your book choices for our next unit, Literary Nonfiction. So your goal is to watch this and then fill out the accompanying form that says your top 4 choices. So I would jot down any of these books that seem interesting to you. The first one I'm going to talk to you about is called Stolen into Slavery. It is based on the true account of Solomon Northup, and it's the 12 Years a Slave. So if you've seen that movie, this is going to be the young adult version of that story. So it's relatively short. It's written with it has some pictures, but basically it starts out exactly where you would think. He is stolen into slavery, and so it starts with his life in Washington, D.C., and then kind of his escape into trying to find freedom. So this is called Stolen into Slavery, and this will be one of your options. Another one of the options is Hidden Figures. If you know that lit nonfiction might be something of a struggle for you, this would be a really good choice because this is going to be one that I read out loud during some of our mini lessons. And so this is all about, it was made into a movie recently, and so some of you may have seen it, but it's basically about 4 Black women and how they, and their impact at NASA. So it's Mary Jackson, Katherine Johnson, Dorothy Vaughan, and Christine Darden. And basically it's the work that they did kind of right towards the end of World War II, and then when NASA was not necessarily in its beginning stages, but their big impact on the different missions at NASA. So that's Hidden Figures. The next one I want to talk to you about is called Zlata's Diary. So if you have heard of The Diary of Anne Frank, which is from World War II, this is going to be kind of similar. It's been compared to that, but basically it's an 11-year-old girl, and she starts this diary, and it's about normal things like piano lessons, like boys she likes, and school, and her friends. And then all of a sudden, in Bosnia, which is where this is set, becomes kind of a war-torn country. And so then she's writing about the death of her friends and food shortages and having to hide from some of the different, not necessarily bombs, but just the fighting and the war that's going on. And so if this is something that might interest you, this is Zlata's Diary, and again, it's set in Bosnia. The next one I want to talk to you about is by Gary Paulsen. So many of you have read some Gary Paulsen novels. This is called Woodsong, and so this story is basically about him and how he is, how he utilizes his own life and the true his true accounts, and how they've inspired his fiction novels. So this, if you like Gary Paulsen stories, these are going to be the true accounts that led to him creating all of those books like Hatchet and different things like that. The next one I want to talk to you about is called We Beat the Street. And so this is a story of 3 doctors who come out of Newark, New Jersey. And it's Dr. Samson Davis, Dr. Ramik Hunt, and Dr. George Jenkins. And so basically they beat the odds. So it's these men who faced what a lot of young Black men faced during their time. Gangs, peer pressure, drug use. The area in which they grew up was one where they, becoming a doctor was very low odds. And so this is their story and their journey and how they became interested in medical and dental programs, and how they stayed out of trouble and were able to kind of overcome a lot of the different obstacles that faced them. And that's called We Beat the Street. The next one I'm going to talk to you about is called Enchanted Air. And so this is, it's a memoir. It's by Margarita Engel. And so basically it's this girl who kind of has 2 different versions. You can see on the cover here that it's showing kind of this juxtaposition. So she has, she's being pulled in 2 different directions. She has, she's Cuban, but she also lives in LA. And so this story is about the Cuban Revolution and how then the Bay of Pigs, and how kind of Cuba wasn't necessarily at war with the U.S., but how basically travel was not allowed anymore, and how we were not really on the same side. And so she's kind of stuck, between a rock and a hard place. And so it's about her trying to come to terms with her heritage and also where she currently lives. And so this is, again, called Enchanted Air. The next one I want to talk to you about has actually been made into a movie with Jake Gyllenhaal. It was when he was really young. This is the real story of Homer Hickman. And so he became really interested in space and NASA and space travel. And so basically it's set in 1957 is when this Homer experienced this, but basically his goal was to send a rocket to space. So he lives in this kind of like dying town, and it's called Colwood, and basically he is so enamored with like Sputnik and like, post World War II, Cold War, trying to get to the moon, that he decides that he's going to find scrap metal and he's going to build a rocket. And so it's his journey into kind of breathing life back into the town, into his family, and like, does he actually, send a rocket into space? So again, that's October Sky. The next one I want to talk to you about is if you're interested in kind of like any type of like outdoor like kind of thrilling experiences. So this is called Into Thin Air by John Krakauer. And so John Krakauer is one of, the elite group of people who have climbed Mount Everest. And so that's like over 29,000 feet into the mountains. And he climbed it during its deadliest season, where it took the most lives up until that point. And so it's basically like his journey. It's his journey up, but it's also his journey back down, because things start to get really scary on his way back down. So he makes it to the top, and then it's like, well, now I have to get back to base. And so it's all about that journey, and it's pretty terrifying. And he's very real and open about like all of the terrible things that happen along the way to him and to the other individuals. So if that's something that seems interesting to you, it's called Into Thin Air. The next book that I want to talk to you about is called Trapped. So this is about the San Jose Chilean I guess it would be like a mining area, or kind of like the mine. And so in August of 2010, so really just 10 years ago, 33 men were trapped 2,300 feet underground, and they were forced to kind of like come together and persevere and figure out how to ration food, but eventually they were rescued. But really this whole story is about hope and perseverance, and how they never gave up, and how the outside world never gave up, and we just watched along with them while they were kind of forced to live underground for several days, weeks. So that is called Trapped. The next one I'm going to talk to you about is called The Great Fire. This is set in Chicago in the late 1800s. And so basically this fire caught in a barn in Chicago, kind of on the outskirts of town. And then because Chicago was wooden, everything, like the bridges, sidewalks, everything was wooden, the fire just spread. And so it was almost like the entire city burned to the ground. And so people thought like Chicago will never recover. And obviously it did. And so it's the stories of the survivors and how they rebuilt the city. And so it's that whole experience. So if that's something that might be interesting to you, these next few are a little bit shorter, like starting with Trapped. So these are books that like you might move through a little bit more quickly. So if you're like, oh, I might get my feet wet with something shorter, these next few are going to be good for you. This Beyond Courage is the next book I wanted to talk to you about. So it's basically stories of individuals and groups who stood up to the Nazis and helped smuggle individuals out of Nazi invaded areas. And so it's a lot of stories that you probably haven't heard before. This would be a great book. It has a lot of images and maps and timelines, and so it gives some context for World War II. But it's also going to be a great story of like survivor stories that you probably haven't heard before. And that's called Beyond Courage. The next one, if you're really into adventure, would be a good one for you. It's called Into the Unknown. I really like this book in the sense that it has lots of maps and images and diagrams and like kind of some interactive pieces where you can like pull things out and look at the different like journeys. So basically it details 14 different journeys, and each section talks about like the materials and the individuals who were a part of this. And so it starts in like 340 BC and it goes all the way into when we get to the moon with Neil Armstrong. So that is called Into the Unknown. I have three more for you. The next one is called Flesh and Blood So Cheap. This is about, it's 1911 in New York, and basically it's the shirtwaist factory. So it's the fire that happens there that kills 146 of its workers. And so it's terrible, and but something the good that comes from this, not necessarily like because this terrible thing happened, individuals and mostly immigrant women fought for the rights for workers. And so the working conditions prior to this fire were terrible, right? This was completely avoidable. One of the reasons that the individuals passed, or there were so many deaths during this fire, was because they didn't have proper exits. They didn't have there was too many people, it was overcrowded, and so they were unable to get out in time. And again, it could have been avoidable. And so this is kind of the story of that fire, but then also how these, workers banded together and said, um, we have to have better conditions. Like, working people have to have good conditions. Two more. So the next one is one that I'm really excited to read. It's called Master of Deceit. It's about J. Edgar Hoover and his experience with the FBI. So he was the first director of the FBI, but it's all about the untold stories. And so it's kind of like, if you like conspiracy theories and kind of the hidden stories about like what was happening behind the scenes, this would be a really good choice for you, because it's basically like, this isn't what they told the public, right? So again, it's called Master of Deceit. It's the story of J. Edgar Hoover. And then the last one I'm talking about, if you were really interested in war, like I know you've been talking about the Civil War in social studies, I think, this is the just different accounts and stories from different soldiers. Again, this is going to be a really quick one. This is going to be a pretty quick one. It's going to have a lot of timelines and information and pictures and things like that. So if you're more into informative text, this would be a good choice for you. So you have lots of different choices. Please go into the form and pick your top 4. I will do my best to match you with your first choice, but obviously just based on availability, that's why you have a couple backups. So fill out the form and then go ahead and check the board for whatever else you need to be working on today.